go. So welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be continuing our journey through the book of Joshua. And I'm going to invite everyone to unmute for a moment so that we can say our blessing for the study of Torah, where the last words are la'asok b'divrei Torah. So let's say that together. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu, melech haolam,
asher
Shanu b'mitzvah, b'tzivanu,
hitzivanu la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei Torah.
Blessed are you, O Eternal One, who gives us the blessing of studying together and soaking ourselves in the words of Torah. So, where we left off 2 weeks ago, we were about to study about Rahab. And Rahab, the harlot, is a very unlikely heroine. In my preparation for teaching a bar mitzvah student, who I will actually be teaching right after this class, I'm working with a student who has not had a lot of formal training and who is going to become bar mitzvah later this year. So I'm going to be teaching a class on people of the Hebrew Bible, and I decided to include Rahab, and I listed her under brave women who saved lives. And I have described her as a Canaanite woman in Jericho who hid Israelite spies and helped them escape. And because of her bravery and faith in God, she and her family were spared when Jericho was conquered. And she later became an ancestor of King David. So she was quick thinking and courageous. But the first question about her that we will have is why it was that she chose to help the spies. Now, as you may remember from the last time we met, we've described them very much as spies in contrast to the men who went out to scout out the land in the Torah. These are definitely spies. They're going on a mission to figure out how they're going to really conquer the land. So we're going to start by talking about Rahab, who is described as a harlot, but some describe her as an innkeeper. So it's possible that there wasn't a really huge distinction between an inn and a brothel at that time and place. And the Art Scroll Siddur, which is or the Art Scroll, I'm sorry, not the Art Scroll Siddur, the Art Scroll Tanakh, calls her an innkeeper. And Rashi certainly describes her as a prostitute. We've found before that a lot of our ancient rabbis don't want to call her a prostitute. They want to paint her as a much more virtuous woman. Just like we saw in previous classes, our sages tend to want to amplify people's better attributes and brush aside what they see as negative ones. So it's not surprising that in the Art Scroll edition, they call her an innkeeper and they don't refer to her as a harlot. But either way, her place, whether an inn or a brothel or perhaps both, was a good place for the spies to stay because people of all descriptions stayed there. It was potentially an inconspicuous and anonymous place for them to stay. And it was a really great place for them to hear a lot of gossip and to know what was going on in town. So it's pretty amazing that they chose this perfect place to stay, possibly through divine intervention. Maybe it was a miracle in and of itself that they chose this place to stay, or perhaps they had done some research ahead of time and they knew that this was the right place to go. but its placement, which was in the wall of the city, made it a perfect lookout and access point. So we are going to read a little bit of the text and then we're going to have some more. Let me get the text up.
Is it the handout you gave us?
Yes, there we go. That's the one. Okay, here we go. So let's start with Diane. Could you read this portion where we hear what happens when the spies show up and she talks to them?
Joshua 2, 9-16. She said to the men, I know that God has given the country to you because dread of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land are quaking before you. For we have heard how Adonai dried up the waters of the Sea of Reeds for you when you left Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings across the Jordan, whom you doomed. When we heard about it, we lost heart, and no one had any more spirit left because of you. For the eternal your God is the only God in heaven above and on earth below. Now, since I have shown loyalty to you, swear to me by God that you in turn will show loyalty to my family. Provide me with a reliable sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death. The men answered her, Our lives are pledged for yours, even to death. If you do not disclose this mission of ours, we will show you true loyalty when God gives us the land. She let them down by a rope through the window, for her dwelling was at the outer side of the city wall, and she lived in the actual wall. She said to them, Make for the hills so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Stay there in hiding 3 days until the pursuers return, then go your way.
Thank you. Okay. So Rahab is very wily and quick thinking. So when the police actually show up, she hides the spies. She hides them up on her rooftop. And then she doesn't deny that she has seen them. But instead, she says that she has provided lodging for them. But then she says, go run away after them very quickly. She actually misdirects them and acts like she's being loyal to the ruler of Jericho and sends them off in the wrong direction. So, why do you think she does this? Any theories?
She has heard about God, right? And she knows that God is great and powerful, and she wants God to be behind her, blessing her.
Great. Yep.
She knows which way the wind is blowing.
Yes. Okay.
Wants to be with the winning team.
Yes, very true. Okay. So the word that is used to describe her as a prostitute is zonah. And the word zonah means one who strays. That means being unfaithful and traitorous. And it usually means being unfaithful and traitorous against one's spouse or even against God. But it could mean that she's being unfaithful and traitorous against her own people. So, one of the things we know about her from the text is that she lives in the outer wall of the city. And the outer wall is not only a geographic location, but it's also an indication of her social status. She's marginalized and she's therefore has no problem with defying the society in which she's been living. The text doesn't actually place a value judgment against her. It doesn't call sex work immoral or corrupt. And in fact, we know that there are cases throughout the Tanakh where our ancestors go to sex workers or people that they think are sex workers You may remember that Judah goes to his daughter-in-law Tamar, who he doesn't realize is his daughter-in-law. She's disguised as a harlot. And he thinks that she's a harlot, and he goes to her for sex and impregnates her. Um, and that is actually not something that anybody is horrified by, the fact that he's going to a prostitute. So going to a sex worker is not something that is seen as a horrible thing for him to be doing. So when we're introduced to Rahab and told that she's a harlot, we're not necessarily supposed to think badly of her. So here we are, and we know that Rahab has seen that God has liberated the slaves, the slaves from the cruelty of Egypt. And it was not only slavery, but it was also tyranny and totalitarianism. And she's seen the regional superpowers of Sihon and Og defeated by the Israelite army. And she sees this as a way toward a new and better life for herself and her family. Like you said, she sees the way the wind is blowing. She sees what side is going to be the right side for her to be on. So now we're going to read how she is told to indicate where her home is so she and her household can be saved. Arlene, can you read this next part? Arlene, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. But the men warned her, "We will be released from this oath that you have made us take, unless when we invade the country, you tie this length of crimson cord to the window through which you let us down. Bring your father, your mother, your brother, and all your family together in your house. And if anyone ventures outside the doors of your house, their blood will be on their head, and we shall be clear. But if a hand is laid on anyone who remains in the house with you, their blood shall be on our heads. And if you disclose this mission of ours, we shall likewise be released from the oath that you made us take."
Okay, so what is it that she was told to put as a sign to indicate where she lives?
Well, she had to tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree.
Yeah, exactly, but it wasn't a yellow ribbon. What was it?
Crimson.
A red ribbon.
Right, it was a length of crimson cord, and the words in Hebrew are et hatikvat hut ha-shani hazeh, this cord of crimson rope. And in that sentence, the word for rope is actually tikva, which is the same word as hope. Yes, exactly. So Rabbi Michael Hatton writes, the lesson of her personal tale is that every person is capable of changing the direction of his or her life by willfully choosing a different moral path. The art of conscious living is to seize the more mundane occasions provided by our daily lives in order to come to our own self-realizations concerning who we really are and who we can become. Thus it is that the rejected and uncelebrated harlot becomes not only the instrument for her family's salvation, but also the ancestor of Israel's most outspoken prophetic line. And Professor Tikva Frymer-Kensky, catch that, Tikva is his name, wrote that Rahab was smart, provocative, tricky, and unafraid to disobey and deceive her king. Sorry, Tikva is a woman in this case. She also said that Rahab was one of the first non-Israelite people and the first Canaanite woman to ally with Israel. And Michael Coogan of the Harvard Divinity School writes that the book of Joshua, more than any other book of the Bible, contains origin stories for religious rituals, genealogical relationships, and other aspects of ancient Israelite life. And the legend of Rahab is one example. Her story provides an answer as to how a Canaanite group became part of Israel, despite the law in Deuteronomy that says that we were to kill all Canaanites and not to intermarry with them. So here we are with this woman, Rahab, and we'll find that later in her story, there is, she definitely becomes part of the Israelite people, she and her family. There's midrash that says that Rahab converted, and some say she even married Joshua himself. That's extremely unclear, and there's no report in the book of Joshua of his having married anyone or having any children. But there is a midrash that very clearly says that she is that she is part of a very important line. So here we go. Let's see. Joan, you did not read yet. Okay, so Joan, can you read this?
Well, it's got a lot of names in it. I'll try.
Okay.
From the Megillah. 14.
No, it's actually from the Talmud, from a tractate that's called
Oh,
Megillah.
okay. I didn't think it was from the Book of Esther.
Nope.
Okay. Furthermore, Naaman said, Huldah was a descendant of Joshua. 8 prophets who were also priests descended from Rahab the prostitute, and they are Neriah, his son Baruch, Seraiah, Maaseiah, Jeremiah, his father Hilkiah, Jeremiah's cousin Hanamel, and Hanamel's father Shalom. Rabbi Yehuda said, so too Huldah, the prophetess, was a descendant of Rahab, the prostitute, as it is written here with regard to Huldah, the son of Tikva, and it is written elsewhere in reference to Rahab's escape from the destruction of Jericho. This cord of Tikvat, scarlet thread, Joshua 2:18.
Right, so that they're making this reference that the son of Tikva is connected to this cord of Tikva, that the name, using the name Tikva indicates that there was a relationship between that and the fact that there was a scarlet thread that was involved. And that sometimes happens. Now, Huldah, who was a prophetess, is actually the prophetess to whom there was a book that was found in a nook in the temple, and it was taken to her for verification that it actually was a holy book. And there is an indication that it actually was the book of Deuteronomy, and that the book of Deuteronomy had been lost for centuries. And she said, yes, this really is the one. So now we're going to move on. There's also a story about Rahab having been one of the world's great beauties. I have to tell you that the Talmud is full of risque, scatological, graphic, and pornographic references. So much so that someone I know put together a game of something called Cards Against Humanity. You might have heard of that game, but she put out a set of cards that uses all of these really filthy references from the Talmud, and it can be really hilarious. So now we're going to read one more midrash from the Talmud, and Akiva, I'm going to ask you to read this one, please.
Okay.
Okay?
From here.
Yeah, you can read from there, but read loudly, please.
Sure. To complete the discussion about the prophetess, the Gemara cites a Baraita. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
In which the sages taught there were 4 women of extraordinary beauty in the world: Sarah and Abigail, Rahab and Esther. The sages taught in a Baraita Rahab aroused impure thoughts by her name, i.e., the mere mention of her name would inspire lust for her. Yael by her voice, Abigail by remembering her, Michael, the daughter of Saul, by her appearance. Similarly, Rabbi Yitzhak said, anyone who says, Rahab, Rahab, immediately experiences a seminal emission due to the arousal of desire caused by Rahab's great beauty. Nachman said to him, I say Rahab, Rahab, and it does not affect me. Rabbi Yitzhak said to Rav Nachman, when I said this, I was specifically referring to one who knows her personally and recognizes her beauty. Only for one who has met Rahab in person is the mere mention of her name capable of arousing lust.
So I am told that many young Talmud students would taunt each other with cries of Rahab, Rahab, seeing if they could get a rise out of each other. And if you imagine these like 14 and 15-year-old yeshiva buchers taunting each other this way, it sometimes was, in fact, indeed effective.
At that age, anything is effective.
Yes, exactly. There you go. Thanks for bringing.
And by the way, I think we should change the word prostitute to entrepreneur.
Thank you so much. That's an interesting and important addition to our scholarly studies. Thank you. Okay, so having introduced you to Rahab, and there is a lot more we could say about her, but we're going to stop at this point. We're now going to continue on the next chapter where we actually finally cross the Jordan River in chapters 3 and 4. So now we're going to read Joshua 3:1. 3:1 through 6. So let's see. Phil, I can see that you've joined us. Are you able to read, or do you want me to have somebody else read at this
No,
point?
I'll read.
Fantastic. Can you read Joshua 3:1 through 6?
Sure. Early the next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and marched to the Jordan. They did not cross immediately, but spent the night there. 3 days later, the officials went through the camp and charged the people as follows. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Eternal, your God, being borne by the Levitical priests, you shall move forward. Follow it, but keep a distance of some 2,000 cubits from it, never coming any closer to it, so that you may know by what route to march, since it is a road you have not traveled before. And I'm sorry, your picture is covering the words.
Oh,
Can you scroll it up a little?
sure. There you go.
And Joshua said to the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow God will perform wonders in your midst. Then Joshua ordered the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and advance to the head of the people. And they took up the Ark of the Covenant and marched at the head of the people.
Fantastic. Thank you. So here we are in preparation. God instructs Joshua to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, leading the people. So this establishes a sacred procession and emphasizes the divine presence and guidance. Everett Fox, who we've heard from before, writes in his book, The Early Prophets, the motif of a religious object such as the ark leading troops into battle is known all over the ancient and medieval world. Although this chapter involves no fighting per se, it seems wholly appropriate the ark, borne by priests, spearheads the long-awaited fording of the Jordan and thus inaugurates the conquest of Canaan. And then we're going to have something miraculous that's going to happen in just a minute, which we are, let's see, let's go ahead. Before we get to that, we're going to read these next two bits, Joshua 3, 7 to 8. Let's see, Diane, can you read that one?
God said to Joshua, "This day, for the first time, I will exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they shall know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. For your part, command the priests who carry the ark of the covenant as follows: when you reach the edge of the waters of the Jordan, make a halt in the Jordan."
Great. And you know what? Why don't you also read this next part?
And Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come closer and listen to the words of the Eternal your God. By this Joshua continued, you shall know that a living God is among you."
Thank you. Okay, so why do you think that these two portions are important? What's going on here?
He's setting up the miracle or whatever's going to happen next, and he wants the people to observe it.
Yes,
The other thing is it mirrors the crossing of the Red Sea.
absolutely it does. Yes, and we're going to talk about that some. What else is it setting up? What else is it making clear?
It's making clear that Joshua is the chosen leader and that God has chosen him.
Ding, ding, ding. Excellent. Yes, very good. God is declaring Joshua is the leader, and Joshua is showing both leadership and humility by giving God credit for what's about to happen. Joshua is not going to make any kind of a mistake by making it look like he's the one who's making the miracle happen. So far, we've had several parallels to the Exodus story. We've had the people stop overnight and camp on the edge of the river. They've been told to sanctify themselves. They've been told that something miraculous is going to happen, but they don't know what. And if we had, and this is again Everett Fox speaking, if we had any doubts as to Yehoshua's leadership capabilities, they are dispelled by his Moshe-like act of splitting the waters of the Jordan. Although Yehoshua himself does not stretch out a staff as Moses and Aaron had done, this time the act of cleaving the river is portrayed as coming directly from God. So this is the second time in our history that the waters before the people are going to be split. And there's actually a third time that waters are going to be split in our history with Elijah in 2 Kings. He also is presented as a kind of Moses-like figure during another great crisis in Israel's history. And perhaps we will study the Book of Kings and get to that one. But I will also say that there are those who have looked for a scientific explanation for the events in this chapter, just like there are those who have looked for scientific explanations for the splitting of the Red Sea and for all of the plagues that happened in Egypt. And those who have looked for scientific explanations of what happened here have noted the existence of clay riverbanks in the area, and that's a soil composition that could easily lead to a temporary blockage. But the text of the Torah and of the Tanakh is certainly not interested in that approach. Of course, this is seen as a miracle. So as the priests step into the overflowing Jordan River, the waters stop flowing and pile up, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. And this, as we said, echoes what happens at the crossing of the Reed Sea. So what's going to happen here is a huge rite of passage. Passing through the split waters is very much like passing through a birth canal and being born anew. I don't want to use the phrase born again, since that has so many connotations. But here the people are, and they're moving even more clearly from their old wandering nomad selves to becoming a new people who are going to conquer the land that they've been promised. So let's go on and read about the parting of the waters, take 2. Akiva, do you want to read Joshua 3:15 through 17?
And Joshua said,
Nope.
sorry. Now the Jordan keeps flowing over its entire bed throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the bearers of the ark reached the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark dipped into the water at its edge, the waters coming down from the upstream piled up in a single heap a great way off at Adam, the next town next to Zarethan, and those flowing away downstream to the Sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, ran out completely. So the people crossed near Jericho. The priests who bore the Ark of God's covenant stood on dry land exactly in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed over on dry land until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan.
Fantastic. So, any thoughts, any observations here before we move on?
Well, there's always a lot of repetition in the Torah.
Yeah.
Stories and themes repeat.
Yeah. And this is somewhat the same, but somewhat different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to another thing that has some repetition and some reminiscence. This is a part called that I've labeled the memorial stones. And the image that we have there, it looks like they're carrying giant watermelons. They're not. They're huge stones. That was just one of the images that I was able to find. So let's see. Arlene, can you read Joshua 4:1-9, please?
When the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, God said to Joshua, select 12 individuals from among the people, one from each tribe, and instruct them as follows. Pick up 12 stones from the spot exactly in the middle of the Jordan where the priest's feet are standing. Take them along with you and deposit them in the place where you'll spend the night. Joshua summoned the 12 men who he had designated among the Israelites, one from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, walk up to the ark of the eternal your God in the middle of the Jordan, and each of you lift a stone unto his shoulder, corresponding to the number of the tribes of Israel. This shall serve as a symbol among you in time to come When your children ask, what is the meaning of these stones for you? You shall tell them. The waters of the Jordan were cut off because of the ark of God's covenant when it passed through the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off. And as so, these stones shall serve the people of Israel as a memorial for all time. The Israelites did as Joshua ordered. They picked up 12 stones corresponding to the number of tribes of Israel from the middle of the Jordan, as God has charged Joshua, and they took them along with them to their night encampment and deposited them there. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they have remained there to this day. Wow.
Oh,
Wow. So there's a lot going on here. So what does this remind you of? What are you hearing here that has echoes of things you've heard before? Where have we heard about one from each tribe before?
the spies.
Right? The first set of scouts who were sent out to look at the land of Israel, absolutely. We also get to hear about one from each tribe when they are taking the census. But I think the thing that we remember the most is the one from each tribe when they're sent out to spy out the land, to search out the land. So this is sort of a do-over where they're going to be doing something and it's going to be a positive connotation as opposed to the first time where they kind of messed up, right? So here they're going to be given something to do and they're not going to mess it up. So I think that that's a positive thing. What else is there anything else that jumps out at you that reminds you of something? I will give you a hint. There's a word that I put in bold.
Symbol.
Symbol, right. So I put symbol and then the sentence after that.
It's like the Haggadah.
Yeah, what is the meaning of this to you? When your children asks you, what is the meaning of this? You will tell them,
Huh.
right? So
Yes.
here is a flashback to
Okay,
Exodus
thank you.
13, 7 through 9. Akiva, do you want to read us
Okay,
that
thanks.
flashback, please? Throughout, yes.
Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what Hashem did for me when I went free from Egypt. And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of Hashem may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand Hashem freed you from Egypt.
Great. So you'll see that the word sign and the word in Hebrew that I also made bold, but it's kind of hard to see, in both cases is the word oat. And this should remind you of this paragraph in Exodus and also of the 4 questions and the fact that a lot of things that happen, we're instructed to tell our children and we're instructed to encourage our children to ask questions. We talked about this last Shabbat morning, for those of you who were with me, that it was this past Shabbat morning, right? That we talked about it, that our job as Jews is not to follow blindly. In fact, the Hebrew language, the biblical Hebrew language, did not have a word for obey. It had a word, shema, for listen and understand, but not for obey blindly. When they revived the Hebrew language to be spoken in Eretz Yisrael, they had to find a word for obey, and they needed to find it in Aramaic because there was no word for blind obeyance. Like the word that the religion of Islam is to submit to the will of Allah. That is not who we are as a people. Our job is to wrestle. That is our name, to Yisrael, to wrestle with God and to ask questions. And that is what we are supposed to be doing. So here we are asking questions, and here we are encouraged in Exodus, in Joshua, and elsewhere to ask questions and to teach our children, not blindly, but to teach them to ask questions. So moving on from there, is there one set of stones? Is there two sets of stones? What's going on with these sets of stones? Let's see. Diane, can you read us from Steinsaltz what he says about Joshua 4:9?
And Joshua also established another set of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, not necessarily set up by those same 12 men, beneath the place of the feet of the priests, bearers of the Ark of the Covenant. These stones were arranged in a pile on the dry riverbed, and they were there under the flowing river to this day. And they are there under the flowing river to this day. Some explained that Joshua set up these 12 stones of his own accord, one on top of the other, so that they should protrude above the water to mark the spot of the miracle.
Yeah. So that's an interesting explanation for it. Meanwhile, we're also told that the stones were set up in a place that was 40 miles away in order to fulfill the promise in Deuteronomy. So in Deuteronomy 27:1-7, let's see, Joan, can you read what we were told to do when we got to the land?
Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, observe all the instruction that I enjoin upon you this day. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan into the land that is your God, that your God is given you,
Where to?
you shall set up large stones, coat them with plaster.
I'm sorry, somebody's got something going on in the background. If you could mute if you're not speaking, I'd appreciate it. So go back to, let's see, 4, upon crossing the Jordan.
Upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones about which I charge you this day on Mount Ebal, or Ebal?
Ebal, yeah, Ebal, it's Ebal.
Ebal, and coat them with plaster. There too you shall build an altar to your God, an altar of stones. Do not wield an iron tool over them. You must build the altar of your God of unhewn stones. You shall offer on it burnt offerings to your God, and you shall sacrifice their offerings of well-being and eat them, rejoicing before your God.
Thank you. So this seems interesting, and it seems even more interesting in light of the fact that here is an explanation of the fact that there are these stones that may or may not be in the middle of the Jordan, that may or may not be there to this day, whenever this day is. We don't know exactly when this day is, when the book was being written, we suppose. Then we have these stones that were carried 40 miles away to be set up on Mount Ebal. And then we're also told elsewhere that the stones were set up in Gilgal, which is in a completely different direction. So here is how the Talmud reconciles all of this, because the Talmud has to find some way of making sense of the fact that there are these conflicting stories. But before I tell you this, let me explain something about the conflicting stories. We often find in the Torah and in the writings, well, in the writings, but also in the prophets, that there are multiple traditions and multiple stories that have come up through our ancestors. If you think of even the story of creation, there are two different creation stories that come from different perspectives. And there are other stories where you see two different stories that are woven together. And one might, if one is thinking about this from an anthropological standpoint, one might consider that these are stories that were told around campfires for thousands and thousands of years by different sets of people or different storytellers. And when one storyteller got up to tell the story, she might tell the story one way. And when a different storyteller got up to tell the same story, she might embellish or explain it in a different way, or teach it to her son or daughter, who might teach it and tell it a different way years later. And so when the traditions were written down, they might have to combine them in different ways. Also, there might be traditions that came from the tribes of the people of the North and traditions that came from the tribes of the people of the South. And when they were written down in our holy books, they had to find a way to combine them and edit them together in a way that it made it look and feel like a cohesive whole. This is, of course, a very different explanation than the idea, the holy idea, that all of the words of the Torah were whispered into Moses's ear and written down verbatim after God spoke them to Moses. Now, that tradition is different for the Torah, the first 5 books, than for the book of Joshua and beyond. And so we have a little bit more leeway in recognizing books that were clearly written by humans than ones that are believed to have been divinely dictated rather than divinely inspired. But as I've described it, you can see that there are issues with the fact that there may be different traditions that had to be woven together. And our sages spent a lot of time trying to figure out how those traditions could be reconciled. And sometimes they came up with very creative solutions. So here's what it says in the Talmud in Sota 34a and 35b through 36a, their explanation of what happened with the 12 huge stones. First, each stone was carried by a single representative of each tribe. The entire nation accompanied those 12 representatives from the Jordan River to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, a distance of over 40 miles. There, Joshua directed the construction of an altar with those stones. And then the Kohanim, the priests, made burnt offerings, and the entire nation feasted and rejoiced. They inscribed the entire Torah on the stones of the altar in 70 languages. And then they dismantled the altar and brought the stones to Gilgal, where Joshua erected them as a monument, signifying Israel's dedication to the Torah. Now, I bring that to you as the explanation in the Talmud, and you may do with it as you see fit.
Were these the first 12 stones that the men had to carry across the Jordan
These
as memorial stones?
Well, the explanation is that these are these 12 giant stones that were picked up in the middle of the Jordan River, and they were instructed in Deuteronomy to take these large stones and take them to Mount Ebal and build an altar out of them. But there was also this altar that was found in Gilgal. And so it is unclear how these things are all reconciled together. And this is how the rabbis of the Talmud wove these stories together and explained the origin of the Gilgal stones being the same as the stones of the altar that were explained in Deuteronomy and in Joshua. Akiva.
So I have a suggestion.
Yes.
There were 12 stones in the breastplate of the high priest.
Little stones.
Little stones.
Different colored gemstones.
Correct. And they were one for each of the tribes.
Yes.
And they were used in very mysterious ways to answer questions and foretell the future.
Yes.
Here, they are set down in the land as a physical
memorial, present, reminder.
Presence.
Yeah.
And they are the embodiment of number 12, God working through it with us in our
Okay.
Couldn't hear that last part.
An embodiment of God working through it in our lives. So I will say that there is a lot going on here, and there's a lot one can read about this, and we are not going to come up with a definitive answer. I think where we're going to end up is with more questions, and that is okay. But what we have found is that this is a new beginning for the Israelite people. There is a definitive break between being in the wilderness and being in the promised land. It's a transition from being nomads to moving towards a settled existence. Moving through the waters, as I said, it symbolically is like a birth canal. It is also like a mikveh, even though they didn't get wet, but it cleanses them from their past and prepares them for this new life. The ark is a symbol of God's presence with them. It separates them from their past and into this land of promise. And there is also one other thing I wanted to say about the miracle of the parting of the sea is that Joshua and Caleb and people who were below the age of 20 when the sea parted the first time are the only ones who are here now, who were alive then. Everyone else died out in the desert. So most of the people who saw that first miracle, I'm sorry, most of the people now who are seeing this sea parting never saw the first miracle. And so this is an opportunity for them to re-experience and to experience for themselves what they have only heard about and to feel it viscerally. And as much as we have for years and years and years said things at the Seder table about this year we are slaves, next year may we be free. I feel like it is only since the hostages have been taken that some of us have felt that as viscerally as we do now. Some people, of course, have felt that viscerally themselves because they had parents and loved ones who were slaves in concentration camps and have always had that feeling of slavery even more deeply part of their bones. But I think that sometimes being closer to an experience and experiencing it yourself, there's no substitute for that. And if not yourself, then having it be closer to you than just a story. So the fact that sometimes things get repeated and repeated and repeated again, there's an idea that it takes 10 times or more for something to be repeated until you really learn it. And I don't want to think that we have to hear the same things over and over in order to really feel them in our bones, especially the terrible things. But sometimes we learn them when they come closer to us. So it is 8 o'clock. And I think that's it for tonight. Again next week. We're on again the week after, and then we're going to take a break till from February 18th is our next class. And then we're taking a break again until March 18th. So thank you all for hanging in. Welcome to all the people who are going to be watching on YouTube. And please email me with any questions, comments, concerns. Happy to have all of you here learning with us.